This episode is brought to you by my free 3-part video series, FAM 101. Discover how to chart your cycles by tracking the 3 main fertile signs: cervical mucus, basal body temperature, and cervical position, and ultimately develop body literacy by paying attention to your fertile signs. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101 to grab your free copy. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 209. Welcome to the 209th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment and say Happy Independence Day, Happy July 4th to all of my American listeners. And for all of my Canadian listeners, we actually just celebrated our Canada Day. That was a couple of days ago. So happy Canada Day to all of my Canadian listeners. And of course, happy Independence Day to all of my American listeners. And in today's show, I'm sharing another installment of my Pill Reality series. And so in today's episode, I'm sharing a conversation that I had with one of the members of my Fertility Friday community, Malissa. And she is sharing her experience using Depo Provera. And so in most of the episodes we've done so far, the women who have been part of the series have shared their experiences with the pill, so varying types of the pill. And in the most recent episode, that was episode number 205, Allie shared her experience with the Mirena ID. And so in today's episode, Malissa is sharing her experience that she had taking the Depo Provera shot. So these episodes, I'll link all of the previous episodes in the show notes page. And you can also find the episodes if you go to fertilityfriday.com/pillreality, one word. And so this is something that I've just been working on and I've been doing interviews kind of as I am in touch with women who've had different experiences on hormonal birth control. And it's just something that is really interesting to me. As you all know from listening to the podcast, I'm really passionate just about sharing information about the common side effects of hormonal birth control. And, I have had women reach out to me who have not had who've had a very positive experience on hormonal birth control, often asking me why I don't highlight experiences that are really positive, why I am kind of presenting the other side of it, which is when women actually experience side effects on hormonal birth control. And I mean, the way that I look at it is that most of us haven't really heard the full information. Many of us haven't read the inserts if you're taking hormonal birth control. And even if you do read the inserts, you often don't think that it could possibly apply to you. And so this is my way of just really sharing more information about hormonal birth controls, what some of the common side effects are, how it affects real women, so how real women have been affected, and ultimately just sharing information that this is something that could happen. And the reason why it's so important to me is because there's a lot of side effects of hormonal birth control that you wouldn't necessarily think are related. And so many women do experience side effects such as those when they're taking hormonal birth control, but it can take months and sometimes years before they make that connection. And many women don't make the connection until after they've come off of the hormonal birth control and they realize a couple months later that those side effects that they had were gone. And so this is kind of the reminder that, hormonal birth control, it does affect every woman because it does change your hormonal profile. And there's certain effects that do happen physiologically to every woman, but how that plays out in your day-to-day life and the specific ways that you experience that are different. And so I'm always very skeptical when a woman tells me that she had absolutely no side effects on hormonal birth control, because most of us don't really know about all the effects that could even happen. And so even if you felt totally fine and everything was great, you still did have changes to your hormonal profile and you still did experience nutritional deficiencies that are just par for the course when you're taking it. And so I know many of the listeners, so you might be in this situation yourself, are in that stage of learning about what hormonal birth control, how it affects the body, and also that the time frame that is useful and necessary to take if you're planning to conceive in the near future. So a lot of the women who jump into my group programs are women who have either recently come off of hormonal birth control or have kind of been thinking about it for a while and still want birth control. So they still want to have effective birth control. They do not want to conceive right now, but they do want to have some space between the hormonal birth control and potentially like a future pregnancy or something like that. But in that space, they don't want to get pregnant. And so the group program is a really great way to help you to gain confidence relatively quickly in the method. So with the fertility awareness method, it is a user-dependent method. It's only as effective as you are. And in order for it to work effectively to prevent pregnancy, you have to have a really good understanding of it. And you also have to have a little bit of practice and experience under your belt. So with fertility awareness, you learn in a combination of kind of reading and learning how everything works. And then if you're working with an instructor, kind of that process of the same kind of process of learning. But there's also that second process of actually doing and being able to see what your cycle's doing and being able to have an opportunity to clarify what you're seeing and to really get clear on, okay, how do I use this as a method of birth control? Like which days are fertile, which days are not? How do I know? What are the rules? How do I use them? And how do I really gain that confidence in knowing that I can use this method and not get pregnant? And so that over the course of the 10 weeks, we take you through basically together 2.5 to 3 months. So for many women in the program, it takes them through 3 full menstrual cycles. So not only do you have the opportunity to learn, but you also have the opportunity to, go home each week and put into practice everything that we've learned, and then have the opportunity to come back each week and ask questions like, okay, so I went home, I did that thing you told me to do, I checked for mucus in this way, I was trying to find my cervix, and this is what happened. Help. I don't understand what I was seeing. And so with this program, it's really hands-on. I mean, literally, I think I just said hands-on after I talked about touching the cervix, but you get it. So if you're ready to really dive in, you're ready to feel confident about using this method for birth control effectively, or on the flip side, if you're trying for pregnancy and you really want to be clear on the timing, you want to make sure that you're timing it correctly, and you also want to have a more in-depth sense of what's happening in your cycle, what information we can glean from your cycle, then I want to invite you. So you are invited to join us in our July group. So at the time that this episode is releasing, we're starting next week, basically. So head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program. If there are still spaces available, you will see an apply now button. And if there are no spaces available, you will see a waiting list button to indicate that this session is full, but then the next one in the future coming months, you can kind of sign up for that one. So if there's still spaces available, you will see the apply now button and you'll be able to apply and we'll be able to get you in. And then if not, you can join us for the next round. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now let's jump into today's episode. And today I'm here with Melissa. And, as my longtime listeners will know, I've been doing a Pale Reality series. And so every now and then I speak to a real woman who wants to share her experience with hormonal birth control. So it's not always the pill, just in terms of whatever hormonal method of birth control that she's using. And so today's no different. And so I'm joined with Melissa, and I was just telling you, Melissa, how excited I am to have you here, and also how thankful I am that you're willing to jump on and share your experience in a very public way. We're having a very private, public conversation.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks so much for being here. And so I suppose we could start just with a little bit of background. I think it helps to orient the listeners. Maybe you could share with us when you first started menstruating and kind of what those years were like, and then at what point did you start using hormonal contraceptives?
Okay, sure. Let's see. I think I had my first period when I was about 10 years old. My mom, of course, had the whole talk thing. And you know how I think in about 5th or 6th grade down here, they normally set the girls aside and explain this is how your period works. And it isn't anything to be totally horrified about. But me being the silly person that I was, I completely forgot about that chat. So when it actually happened, I thought I was kind of dying.
Oh.
It was like there was blood, and I was trying to figure out what was going on. And then my mom was like, "No, it's okay. This happens to every young female around your age, and it means now that you can have kids. Congratulations!" And I was like, "Yay, I guess." So yeah, that was kind of the whole start of puberty thing for me. But from when I was a kid, like where I'm from in the Bahamas, people are kind of really conservative about talking about sex and sexuality with like young people in general, not just females. So when it came to, I guess, the whole birth control conversation, it never really was a thing for me. I mean, we in biology class, they basically taught you how the menstrual cycle worked and everything, but and they did talk about like how the different hormones worked and everything like that. But no one ever told me that, hey, if you track these things, you'd be able to like know when your period's going to show up next. Like the basal body temperature thing never even came up. And I wasn't sexually active until I got married. So I was 26 when I got married. So I think about 4 months before I got married, me and my husband were engaged. And I started looking around trying to figure out, okay, what sort of birth control should I use? Because up until that point, I'd always see the commercials for the pill, the patch, the intrauterine device, the shot, all these different things, and they just didn't sit very well with me. And I couldn't figure out why. All I knew was that like I didn't want to get a shot because I hated needles. I didn't want the patch or the ring because this isn't, Lord of the Rings. Why do I need a ring inside my uterus? This doesn't make any sense. Um, so like I was looking and searching, and the only thing I could really find were like the shot and the pill that were readily accessible in my country. I mean, I'm pretty sure there are others because a couple of my friends have told me that they've gotten implants or IUDs or something like that. But yeah, so what ended up happening was I was stuck between the pill and the shot. The shot more so because I'm a very forgetful person. So the whole dedication to taking a pill every single day, I was worried I was going to forget one. And then, I get pregnant, and then, I'm not ready for kids yet. And I have like 3 kids or something. That was normally the worst case scenario for me. I'm going to get pregnant and I'm going to have quadruplets, and it's going to be scary. And I'm not ready. So the first one I went on because I was on 3 different types of birth control. The first one was the 1 month shot. I think it was the messy gyna or something like that. And I did read a couple of the side effects, but it was like really superficial Facebook stuff where it was like you might get some breast tenderness, you might gain a little bit of weight, there's a chance for you to have like stroke or something like that. But my doctor basically told me you're a young, healthy female, so it shouldn't really be much of an issue. So I was like, oh, okay, fine, let me try this one. And then I think after about 4 or 5 months of doing the 1 month shot, he was like, well, we do have another shot that's very similar to this one, same composition and everything like that. It's just a slightly larger dose, air quotes real hard there. And it was the Depo shot. And he was like, this one lasts for 3 months. And, he was basically trying to sell me on the cost effectiveness of going on the 3 month shot as opposed to the 1 month shot because they cost about the same here. Mm. And so I went on that. But then after, I'd say like the first year and a half, like I don't know what was going on, but I was really moody. Like I'm a very emotional person. I can admit that. But it was to the point where I think I was at work one day and I did something incorrectly at work, and my boss basically pulled me aside and, kind of firmly told me, hey, you need to get your act together. I understand you're going through a lot of stuff, but get your head together. And I burst out crying in the middle of my job. And that is so unlike me. Like I wasn't normally the type of person to I wasn't used to fits of jealousy like I was getting. I wasn't used to like sudden impatience or anything like that. Normally, if something terrible happened like to me or I experienced something terrible, I would be able to just kind of sit down with myself and be like, okay, maybe that person was having a long day, or I'd be able to calm myself down and reasonably think of it from the other person's perspective kind of thing. But then I think it was about two years in to taking hormonal contraceptive altogether, where like I was basically having like a panic attack or an emotional breakdown. I don't know what you want to call it, but my husband basically told me, he was like, I don't know if you realize this, but your personality's kind of been changing over the last year or so. And I didn't really want to say anything about it because I just thought it was like stress from your job or something like that. But it seems like it's something more than this. And
Wow.
I basically asked him, like, so when did you notice this change start to take place? And he was like, oh, about like it wasn't really anything major before. And then he called off a date somewhere around the time where I started taking the Depo shot because he was like, you were kind of iffy before that, but then got like it really got cranked up after that point, and and it made me really sit down and think that like what exactly changed in my life that had me feeling this way because at that point I hadn't connected the dots. And it wasn't until I started looking online, I mean, really looking online. I stopped seeing the Facebook profile listing of the side effects for like the Depo shot and like birth control in general. And a lot of the stuff was things that I was experiencing, like insomnia, depression, like lowered libido, like a hard time staying focused, low energy. And like when I went and asked my doctor about it, and I was like, okay, I'm feeling this way, like early on when I first started taking the shot, he told me, oh no, that's normal. Everything should like level out in a couple of months. And I'm right there thinking to myself, it's been almost 2 years
Hmm.
and you're telling me that this is normal. And I'm telling you the way I feel isn't normal. So I decided to ditch my doctor since he did not have a uterus and clearly wasn't taking me seriously for some reason. I don't know what that's about. And I went to a female gynecologist. She was awesome, and I
So
basically had
sorry,
another.
I'm totally interrupting you, but so you went to your doctor 2 years in. Is that what?
Mhm.
And then your doctor, and you
Well,
expressed how you felt, and then your doctor was kind of like, it's normal.
yeah, but it was kind of like over the span of that 2 year period where I was like, okay, I noticed that I've had about 8 weeks of spotting. This is kind of unusual for my body. Oh no, that's normal for people who are getting used to like hormonal contraceptive. And then I was like, okay, now I'm having like bleeding on and off for like a month and a half. This is completely unusual for me. My cycles are fairly regular. Like it might be a day or two late or a day or two early, but I'm not used to it being continuous kind of thing. Or like, hey, I've noticed that I'm starting to have some kind of weird emotional changes. Should I be concerned? And he was like, no, everything's fine. And I'm like, okay, soldier on.
Hmm.
So yeah, when I went to my gynecologist, she basically told me that some people react differently to different forms of hormonal birth control and that maybe the dosage was too high. So she basically suggested maybe we can put you on like a low dose pill version of like the birth control pill, at least until you figure out what it is you want to do from this point. And I was like, okay, cool. So she had put me on, what's it called? Microgynon 30, I think it was. And I noticed that when I started taking it, that I didn't feel quite as crazy as I did, but I still didn't feel 100%. So I at that point, I kind of realized that this might actually be what it is, kind of messing with me. And it took me almost like 3 years to figure this all out. Like,
Hmm. Well, and in your case, I think in your like there's kind of positive and negative in there because you were 26, when you started doing this, you had a good decade of regular cycling and knowing what was normal for you. And even with that in mind, it still took almost 3 years for you to kind of recognize what was going on.
yeah,
And so looking back, if you think about how you were feeling during that time or the different things that were happening, how would you describe it? I've done a number of these interviews, and I feel like it's when you look back, what do you think, or what would you have wanted to tell yourself at that time?
I probably would have told myself to look like search harder for like a natural form of birth control because that's what I was interested in the first place. Because I was like, okay, could probably work with condoms, diaphragm, cervical caps, or something like that. But like down here, it's such an embarrassing thing for a woman to go into a doctor's office, or maybe just it's just me, I don't know, to go in and basically be like, hey, I'm thinking about getting this, and what do you think about it? Because I think at one point I had gone in, my doctor was off the island, my original doctor who I dumped. And I basically had to go to another doctor's office to go and get my shot. At least that was the plan. So I went over there and I basically told them, "Hey, my doctor's off the island. But he told me I should be, a day or so early rather than a week or so late with my refill. So I came here to go and get that done." And they're like, "We're going to need to do they were telling me they need to take a pregnancy test or have someone do a vaginal check or something. I can't remember what they call it, like a pap smear or something. The gynecologist had to check me, and I was like, "But I'm not sexually active. I'm pretty sure I'm not pregnant. I just need a refill." And they were like it got really aggressive. Like they were trying to figure out, well, why are you here if you're not sexually active? It was like, because my doctor told me I had to take it early on so my body could get used to it. And it was a whole rigmarole kind of thing.
Yeah,
But
they
if
were putting you through the hoops, and
it was ridiculous.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. It speaks in many ways to the ways that doctors are trained around hormonal contraceptives. So the information sheets that are handed to doctors and given to doctors to educate them about the side effects of hormonal contraceptives and what they need to do, they really stress the effectiveness, and they stress kind of the main deathly side effects. So, do you smoke? Do you have, conditions that would make it more likely for you to have a stroke or something like that, like, blood clotting disorders or things of that nature. But ultimately, when you mentioned how some of the other side effects are downplayed, the side effects of depression and anxiety and loss of libido seem to be downplayed. Did you notice a change in your libido, or looking back, do you think that there was any difference there?
Definitely looking back, there was a difference because it's kind of weird. It's one of those things that kind of snuck up on me, kind of like the whole mood difference thing. Because I'm not gonna lie, like in high school, I was a typical teenager. I was very interested in like guys and getting guys to like me and pay attention to me. So normally you are very interested in the very physical side of that part of the relationship, but like I feel like I had a very healthy libido, but looking back, I noticed that it was really diminished. It was to the point where it wasn't like, it's like you're excited to sleep with someone, but then like the physical tension isn't there. Like you desire it, but there isn't like, I'm trying to figure out the word. I'm trying to figure out a word that is, politically correct to say.
Like the drive?
Yeah, basically. So it was like, it's the difference between, boy, I'm really hungry, and yeah, I could eat kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, like now I'm looking for a word, but kind of like that the word that's coming to mind is raw, but I feel like there's another word that would be better. Maybe it'll come to
I
me
get,
later.
oh, I think I've got it. Like I would desire it, but like there wasn't like the physical sense of arousal beforehand. Because normally it would be like, reading a romance novel, you get to one of those hot and steamy scenes, and then, your body kind of reacts
Yeah, you got a little
to
tingle
it.
or a big tingle.
Exactly. And I
Something's
didn't
tingling.
like I didn't really get that as often, and I missed that. And it was weird until my husband pointed it out to me that I even noticed it left. And it was kind of scary that it had. And I was like, well, crap, where did I put it?
Hmm. Yeah, that's why I always like to ask for that description, because I feel like it makes it so much more tangible than just to say my libido was lost, but to really get that picture of not having that. That's devastating to me if you lose that, because such an important part of you. I
Yeah,
also
especially.
Oh, sorry,
Mhm.
go ahead.
Well, I was saying, especially how it's like we had just gotten married, and up until that point, like we couldn't keep our hands off of each other. And then when we got married, like the desire was still there, but it just wasn't to the same level I was used to.
Hmm. And then at the time, did you notice it at the time?
No, not at all.
Yeah, just looking back. Well, and I think it's really interesting that it was your husband that pointed out to you a difference in your personality because I've heard this before. I've heard it in my personal life with friends who've used hormonal contraceptives and of course with clients and, throughout the years of doing this. I think it's so interesting because often it's your partner that points this out before you're even aware of it because you're in the middle of it. You're in the forest, like you can't see through
Yeah.
the trees, right? So, how did you feel when he pointed that out? I feel like that would be a really hard conversation. Like your personality's changed. I would feel like something like dropped out of me.
Yeah, well, it was a hard conversation to have, but he's the type of person where he knows me and he knows that I guess I take things to heart really seriously, so he was kind of easy on me with breaking it to me. But he's a very objective person. He's very analytical. That's how we kind of balance each other out. And he was basically saying it was just kind of gradual little things, but he noticed that like I was tired all of the time and like I grew more worried about like what seemed to be inconsequential things. I was a lot more short-tempered than I normally would be with him and with like friends around me and stuff like that. And just him pointing out those couple of things just had me like open my eyes to what had been going on. And it just led me to like play back the last couple of months and then the last couple of years and kind of be like, wow, he is right. Because I don't remember ever being like the jealous type before, or at least not to the point where it's like I would hold a grudge against people or something like that. It was always more like, could you go over there and stay over there? Thanks, Kay. Love you. Bye.
Wow. Yeah,
Uh,
that's
yeah.
that's like that's pretty deep. Well, and so then this leads me to another question. So, before you got married, I mean, you chose to basically handle the birth control, right? So by taking the shot, that meant that you didn't have to use condoms, that you didn't have to negotiate all those things. So how was that transition for you when you decided to like basically not go back for the next shot?
Well, you mean the transition from the shot to the pill, you mean?
The shot to the pill, are you still on or
Oh, no, I am off those now, actually. Or you mean the transition from hormonal birth control to like just not doing that anymore?
yeah, that's the transition.
Okay, the transition for that, it was really scary. What actually got me into thinking about it was, oddly enough, my husband was watching something on YouTube, and one of those extra cheesy commercials came on for like this product called the thermometer. It was like a Bluetooth thermometer and charting app kind of thing. And they were just kind of emphasizing more like the side about how you can, achieve pregnancy. But then there was like this note at the end where you can like delay it if you wanted to. And that kind of perked my attention. And I got kind of nosy. So I started looking up what the thermometer was and how it worked. And then I found out about this thing called the fertility awareness method. And I was like, hello, where were you 4 years ago? Like, because oddly enough, when me and my sister were looking up birth controls at like two separate times, she found all of the natural holistic stuff and I found everything else.
Mm.
So, yeah, I was looking into it and I think this was, oh goodness, I think it was June or something like that. Like I had done all of my research. I was already reading up as much as I could online. I was thinking about taking a class somewhere. And then the hardest part of the whole thing was talking to my husband about it because the very first time when we talked about like birth control and stuff like that, he wasn't into condoms. He wasn't into like the spermicides and stuff like that because, those kinds of things could leave like rashes. Some people can have allergic reactions and stuff like that. And yeah, vasectomy isn't really an option right now since we do want to have kids, and that most people say that you consider that to be irreversible once you get it. So I guess it kind of ended up having to be some kind of hormonal birth control on that part, which kind of annoyed me. But then, it did give me the peace of mind that I didn't have to worry about having to depend on someone else for that. So there was that comfort for it. But when I did decide to have that conversation with my husband, I think he was curious as to how it all worked. And I explained the basics of, checking your fertile signs and stuff like that, and how it was scientifically based. It wasn't the rhythm method or anything like that. And he did have a couple more questions. And then he's the type of person where if you don't answer his question adequately, he's going to do his own research, which was great.
Nice.
So, so mid-June, I was telling him, I was like, well, I was thinking about going until the end of my prescription for the pill, which I think I have another 6 months left on that. And I was like, I don't want to wait that long. I kind of want to stop now. How does that make you feel? And he was like, well, this is for your physical health, your mental well-being. So if you're confident that this can work for us, go for it. And yeah, I think August 4th was the last day I took my last pill. I still have the pill packet in my wallet as kind of like a memorial of that time. So yeah, I'm so glad he was on board with me when it came to making the switch.
Yeah. Well, I think that because no one really talks about the emotional side effects of hormonal birth control. And so I feel
Mm,
like often it's the men that are kind of like, you need to come off this thing because I mean, if you're partnered and your partner is male and they're seeing you suffer,
Actually.
yeah, like this is not what they want. They don't want their beloved to be suffering, especially just the way that you were reacting to it. And so now at the time of this recording, then that means that it's been about 2 months. So this is a fairly recent development, I suppose you could say. And
Yeah.
so what have you noticed so far in these 2 months? Did your period come back? What are your cycles like?
Okay, let me see. Well, I think this is my third official cycle off the pill. My first cycle, surprisingly, my period came back. I was able to see like ovulation happen. And like my first, well, the first bleed was like the withdrawal bleed and everything like that. So at the end of that cycle, everything kind of just went back to normal somewhere. But like the length of my period has been kind of wavering. It's been anywhere between 3 and 7 days with a couple of days of spotting or something like that. I was never one to have like really painful periods or really uncomfortable periods, thank God. So there was that. I did have to get used to dealing with a period again. So like that first one, I stayed home and did absolutely nothing. I did notice that I had a whole lot more energy like the
Mm.
second or third week off the pill, which was so surreal. I didn't think it was going to be like that significant or anything like that. I noticed that my libido came back hard. Like like I was sitting at my desk at work and I just had like one of those amorous thoughts you have about your significant other, and then it was like, hello, where were you?
Wow.
Welcome back. We should throw a party kind of thing. Let's see. I sleep a lot better. That's another thing.
Hmm.
And I think one of the few negative things I could think of coming off of hormonal birth control was that my skin has been a little bit crazy. Like I had breakout all over my face, over my chest, over my back and shoulders. Like it was kind of like when I was back in high school, which I was used to, and I was like, oh, okay, we're just gonna have to deal with this until this levels out. And so far, using like natural soaps, drinking a lot of water, just not eating a lot of junk food has kind of improved that a little bit. Still a ways to go, but so far it's going okay.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I keep thinking because, I'm sure, as you know, a lot of the women that I work with have just a longer history of birth control use and also an earlier start. So
Mhm.
a lot of the women that I've worked with, they come to me and they're the same age as you, but they've been on hormonal birth control for more like 10 years. And so
Yeah.
I think that in your case, it kind of speaks to that. So you were how old when you had your first period? Refresh my memory again.
I think I was about 10 going on 11, somewhere around there.
So you had about 15 or 16 years of cycling.
Yeah, just about.
Yeah. So by the time, and you mentioned casually when you were talking about it that your cycles were always pretty on time and maybe a day or two off.
Yeah, I
And
noticed that like if I was stressed out or something, it might show up a day or two later, something like that. But
yeah,
it was fairly consistent.
yeah. And so that's kind of the hallmark of that. You've gone through the maturation phase, the natural development phase that we have, obviously, because it had been, 16 years. And so your cycles were robust, regular. You probably didn't experience spotting and all that kind of stuff that happens. And so even though you took a stint into the hormones because your cycle had already fully developed and because it was only a couple of years, then you can't guarantee anything, but in your case your cycle came back pretty quick, and it's obviously still leveling out given that you're having some spotting, here and there. And I'm sure it's not, just from, I've never seen a woman come off of hormonal contraceptives to have a cycle that's totally within normal parameters. But with that being said, as you'll notice as the months go by, your cycles will start to kind of get back into the way they were. Um,
Definitely.
so you had a lot of kind of protective factors, I guess you could say, in your case.
Yeah. Because even while I've been charting, like even the cervical mucus has been significantly different. Like before I came off the pill, I started charting just to get into the habit of taking my temperature every morning and checking. And it was like the first month on hormones was like creamy every day, almost every single day. Couple of dry days, wacky temperatures all over the place. Second month, bunch of creamy days, one egg white day, more creamy days, more creamy days, more creamy days, no dry days. Like the following two kind of got a little bit more consistent, where it was like creamy peak mucus, creamy dry days, period kind of thing.
Hmm.
So I can see where it's kind of starting to balance out as time goes on, but it's not 100% there, because when I was younger and I used to get my periods before, I never used to have spotting. It was either period or no period. There was never any spotting. So this
Hmm.
is still new to me.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And what I've seen, it's more rare for me to see women who have never been on hormones or have only been on them for, like, they tried it for a couple months and they had a really bad reaction and so they never took it again. But I always have a few. So there's a small percentage. I guess I could say maybe like 5% of the women that I see, or like 2%, have what I call virgin cycles. And what's interesting is that, with the exception of an actual legitimate endocrine disorder or something like that, for the women that just have been naturally cycling, even if they have other challenges, so even if they have gut issues or something like that, that's not necessarily endocrine, their cycles are fairly robust. And a lot of the
Mhm.
disruptions that are very, very common and typical of women who are coming off of hormonal contraceptives, they just don't exist. So they just doesn't happen. Like the textbook cycle that is in Tony Weschler's book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, or any of the resources that teach you how to chart your cycles when you have quote unquote virgin cycles and you've never used hormonal contraceptives for any significant period of time, and you don't have any, you don't have PCOS or a severe like thyroid issue, your cycles are just like clockwork. They're just robust. They're just normal.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experience, because I think it gives a little bit of context for this conversation. I mean, ultimately, I'm sure you know by now, Depo is like, it's one of the worst in terms
Boy,
of side effects and in terms of how long it can take for your cycle to return normally. It
oh,
has one
definitely.
of the longer. So with regular hormonal birth control, we'd say, 6 months to a year before your cycles start to normalize if you used it long term. And then with Depo, it could be 18 months to 2 years or more. So I think in this case, you're really fortunate to have not started it when you were 12.
Yeah, and it's so weird because this whole experience has just taught me just how different people react to the same kind of birth control so differently. Because my sister takes Depo now. I think she has PCOS because she was growing up, she was the one who had the period where it was now you see me, now you don't hear you see me, here you won't kind of thing. 6 months go by and then she gets a period, and then 4 months go by and she has a period for like a week or something, and then she doesn't see it for the rest of the year kind of thing. So she basically went on the shot because she was like, I'm not interested in having kids anytime soon. Forget it. I don't want to deal with my period. Screw it. Go away. Kind of thing.
Well, that's a little bit scary. I would say that when you, unfortunately, So this is, I guess, just some like unsolicited information. But what the research shows is that for women that do have sporadic periods, that's an indication of a problem, first of all. So we kind of
Yeah.
know that by now. So
Hmm.
those particular women are contraindicated for hormonal birth control because when she comes off that Depo, her period might not show up for a long time. So she's at a higher risk of than like post pill amenorrhea.
Yeah, but then she's the type of person where she doesn't really mind because the whole kid thing isn't really something she's interested in.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and the thing about it though is what's this is what our culture has done, right? It's like, oh, it's your period only matters if you want to have kids. So if you never want to have kids, just go on the pill forever and go on it till you hit menopause and then it's totally fine. And so the challenge that I kind of face and, of course the message with the podcast as is that even if you never want to have kids, ovulation is really important. I mean, do you want to have a sex drive? Do you want to do you want to enjoy because it's a real thing. And so anyway, it's just something to think about because I guess you could say it pains me to think of all the women out there who don't want kids but really feel that that means that their cycle is completely irrelevant because your cycle is part of you. All of those hormones are part of this package. And when you mess them up, you mess up a whole lot of other things. You increase your risk of depression, anxiety, low libido. Some of these hormonal contraceptives shrink your clitoris, as we've talked about on the show, and lead you to be more likely to have painful sex. And so, as long as if she knows all those side effects and the doctor told her about those and she went into it perfectly kind of aware, then I think, that's the best case scenario. At least she's aware. But most of the time, I have never spoken to a woman whose doctor told her that the pill is associated with
yeah.
depression and anxiety and low libido and all those things.
Well, for her, she went into it with her eyes wide open. For me, when I did my research, like I said, I didn't find a whole lot when I went looking. And when I asked my doctor if there were any additional side effects, he didn't even show me the pamphlet that came with anything. He just wrote my prescription, gave me whatever it was, and then sent me on my way. He never showed me like the pamphlet that came with the messy gyne shot. He never showed me the slip that came with the Depo shot, but my gynecologist did, and she was like, "I want to show you something," and she basically showed me the sheet of paper that came with the Depo shot. Like she opened a new packet, complete with syringe, and handed me the paper and said, "Read this. Take your time
Mm-hmm.
and read this because all of this is relevant to you."
Oh,
And I'm right there thinking, like, I hear so many people say that, things change when they get married, like, they're unhappy and like they don't have sex as often as they want to anymore. And I'm right here trying to figure out, has anyone done a study like showing the link between the women who were off birth control when they were just dating the guy versus women who were married and taking contraceptive and the way it's changed like their relationship dynamic. Like I want to see some kind of study on that because I heard you say once on your podcast that it's like women who were on birth control before they met the guy they were with, once they come off it, they realize that they're either A, not attracted to the person they were attracted to before, B, can't stand the way that guy smells because of the whole pheromone thing, or like any number of other things that can kind of cause things to be a little bit rough for a while. So like I really like when I found out about all these different things, like I was upset. I wanted to go to my doctor's office and like flip over a table. I was like, you didn't tell me.
yeah. Yeah, it's really scary. For me, I channel those feelings of anger into the podcast because it's my way of at least putting the information out there because ultimately no one knows. And my big thing is that I always say everyone is going to make the decision that's best for them. And I have a history of hormonal birth control use so I'm not the one that can say like, I've never used it because I have for 2 to 3 years,
Mhm.
way back when. But, even looking back at that time, I am left to wonder how that affected me. I mean, I was also 16, so I don't know. I just thought that that was part of being a moody teenager. But now when I look back, I had some pretty ridiculous mood swings and all kinds of overreactions. But I guess my biggest issue is that the doctors who are prescribing this, and I think I did read the package, but looking at emotional side effects. So I think that's the biggest thing. Women aren't not being made aware of the emotional side effects. And so when they experience them, they just assume that it's just something wrong with them. And the number of stories I've heard, so women saying things like, oh, it was like a haze was lifted over me. I felt like myself again. The energy thing, I've heard women talk about that. So you're not the first person who I've heard who said, like, I finally had energy to get up and like to do things and to exercise. Like I stopped working out. I didn't feel like doing that. And the libido thing is, for me personally, I feel like that is like taking a piece of a person's soul. I think it's really serious. And so I don't know how anyone can think that something that's going to suppress your libido isn't that serious, because that is a foundational piece of who you are. And just when I look back, I just think how fortunate I've been all these years to just have my libido. Not being able to enjoy that part of life is a really, really big problem. And I don't know how that can be diminished.
Mm-hmm. Like, and I was thinking, like, especially when you're in a relationship and it's another way to connect with your partner. And if like you feel that haze or you don't really feel that drive to do so, it kind of puts some kind of barrier. Like it doesn't have to be like a wall or anything. Like you can still be lovey-dovey and stuff like that. But it's like
it is a barrier. It's a physical barrier between the two of you. And imagine what that's like for your partner. And so I'm not trying to minimize what it's like for you, like for our side here. But imagine what that would be like. So imagine if it was reversed and you're the one that has the libido and everything feels great on your end. And then you're trying to, make love to your partner, and your partner is just really never that excited about it.
Yeah.
Like, what is that like from their perspective?
The way my husband explained it, it was kind of like, I don't want to bother you because you're always tired. And I was like, I want to do this even though I'm tired, but I don't want to bother you because you're tired. It's like, well, I'm tired, but I want to do this. So it was just kind of this weird roundabout cyclical conversation kind of thing, where it's like the other person kind of feels put off, even though the first person really wants to do it. They don't want to feel like they're forcing you or like they're pushing themselves on you, or they want to feel like their partner actually wants to be with them and not just feel like they're obligated. And I think that's where a lot of relationships kind of have a bit of an issue when it comes to like loss of libido. Like it's a very hard thing to talk about because, most people are like, you don't have these conversations. What are you talking about? You're not supposed to talk about sex. Sex just happens. It's like in the romance novel where you look at each other across a room and, you grab each other in a dark corner and it's like clothes flying off and you're in bed for like 2 minutes and it's amazing and both of you orgasm at the same time and it's perfect. No, it's not how it works.
Well, and I've talked about it a couple times on the show. It's probably time to do another show about this topic. But what I find to be really interesting is that, culturally, we all kind of know that there's this issue that quote unquote women have, that they're not able to orgasm. And so, I've thought about that a lot, and I've done a couple episodes on that. And often what it comes down to in the conversation is, women are different and we require different types of stimulation. So we need clitoral stimulation and more foreplay and etc. And I'm not saying that that's not true, but the more that I think about it and the more that, how many women are on hormonal birth control, like between 50 and 80%. So, when you're on hormonal contraceptives, it's not in your head because there is a cascade of hormonal changes that specifically attack your ability to have a libido and have an orgasm. It lowers your testosterone on 3 separate fronts. And so it's not something that happens to some women. It's something that happens to all women on it because it's a hormonal response of these drugs. So the question isn't, is it going to affect my libido? It is, how much is it going to affect my libido? Because we should be clear on that, because this is not an emotional reaction. This is a physiological reaction. because the hormones in the pill, for example, they prevent your ovaries from producing the hormones, and then they raise your levels of sex hormone binding globulin, which is basically a protein that it attaches to testosterone and makes it unavailable to your cells. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of how much. and so so
that's such a scary thought.
Well, but it's the reality. And so then how much of this women can't orgasm stuff is, I just don't get enough clitoral stimulation, and how much of it is I'm on this hormone that prevents me from having, because I can think of times in my life where I've had conversations with girlfriends and acquaintances. Like I can remember when I was in college, and it would be like I would make some statement like, yeah, I always have an orgasm every time I have sex. It's just how it is. And I'd have girlfriends being like, every time, okay, wait, every time. And I would it was just like, for me, it's like it was always clear in my mind that this is just how things needed to be. Cause it doesn't make sense. How many men do you know would be content? I have never met any man that would be content to just have sex. But and it only now that I look back, it occurred to me that, I don't know, I've observed, I'm an observer. And so I've observed where, you're on this thing and then you go off of it. And then, lo and behold, a couple of years later, all of a sudden you're getting all the orgasms. So it's like,
yeah. Fortunately for me, thank God, I was fortunate enough to not be one of those people where I had any issues in the orgasm department. I'm very happy about that. Like the desire may not have been there, but once everything got going, it was like, heck yeah. So like, I really feel for those women who never really had an opportunity to like feel what an orgasm feel like. If you haven't had one, I'm doing hand motions, and I know you can't see me, so this is look ridiculous. But it kind of reminds me of like before I got married, like up until that point, like most people will be like, by the time you get a certain age, you've masturbated or something like that. I didn't really get the whole thing behind like the masturbation thing, because up until that point, I think I tried experimenting when I was a teenager, but never really got anywhere. And I think when I up towards more like the wedding, when I'm 26, I had like my first like orgasm, and I was like, holy crap. That was amazing. Be like, this is what everyone's crying for, this is what everyone's screaming for. You know what, I understand now, and I apologize for all the people I badmouthed and said that it's not worth it. It is worth it.
Well, and it's all conjecture, right? Because everyone's experience is different, but I just, yeah, it's part of it is all that, like that equality, that idea in my mind that there are a few men that would be content to take a drug that actually prevented them from having erections and from prevented them from fully having their own normal, natural, healthy sexual experience. And so, the fact that there are the drugs that are so common that prevent us from having that full experience, whether it's the feelings associated with it or the arousal and the libido, or whether it's actually having a full, healthy sexual response, whatever it is, really, it's just time that we talk about this, because as women, we gotta demand better. It's really just there's no excuse, there's no justification for having so many women taking something that's really taking away that part of them. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now. And thank you so much, Malissa, for coming on the show and sharing such personal, intimate details of your life, but also sharing the experiences that you had on Depo, the pill, what it was been like for you transitioning off. And yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of listeners who can relate to some of the experiences that you've had, and also some of the listeners who may have just been looking for information. Maybe they thought about getting the Depo shot, and that's why they searched this podcast episode. So you've given them a lot of food for thought.
That's true. And I'm really glad I was able to come on the show. And I know, like, me personally, I'm not really into the hormonal birth control thing anymore, but I know that, like, there are different women and different points in their life where at some point it may be necessary, or for whatever reason they want to go on it. And you know what, kudos to you. I've done the same. Who am I to throw stones? But like after a while, I couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't keep doing that to myself.
Well, and I think, ultimately, my stance and position is pretty clear. I could pill bash all day, but ultimately, what this is really about is informed consent. And so my biggest issue is that women go into it and they don't know that they could possibly get depressed, or that they could possibly feel anxiety, or these weird intrusive thoughts, like those paranoid thoughts, like you were talking about, increased your
Oh
jealousy and things
yeah.
like that. I mean, if you say something like that to your doctor, you shouldn't feel like you're crazy, because they should know that these are kind of those normal side effects of hormonal birth control. So this is really about information. And
Definitely.
I've talked to so many women. In your case, it was brought to your attention in that 2 to 3 year mark. But for so many women, they come off of it after 10 years and only then realize how deeply it was impacting them.
Yeah.
And so really and truly, this is about, like, if you're going to go on it, I think my personal belief is that if women really knew everything about these hormones and how they affected your cycle and all this kind of stuff, they would, a large percentage of women would still use hormonal contraceptives for periods of time in their lives, because
Mm.
at certain times in your life, it's really the best option. But I feel
Mhm.
like that decision would be made with more care, and perhaps you wouldn't end up being on it for 15 years. Right? Maybe you
Most
would use it for like 3 or 4 years. Like, I'm going to use it when I'm in college, and then when I'm out of college, I'm going to start figuring this stuff out, or whatever the case is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like that was the thing that had me most upset about this whole thing, was the lack of information that I met when I started asking questions, because I'm the type of person, I'm very nosy. Like that's a part of our culture, nosiness, like fried food and nosiness. And like that's what we do down here in the Bahamas. Like, but it was to the point where like when you go to ask questions, people have you feeling like you should know the answer already, or they're not willing to share the information because they think you're too young, or they don't feel like you should be sexually active. Be like, but who are you to hold this information away from me? Like a prime example was when I got married, my someone had given us this book about how to prepare for marriage and everything. And a section in the book was basically explaining how to stretch the vaginal muscle so that your first time isn't painful. And I was like, where the heck was this a year ago? Like when I was getting married,
Mm.
because like if people would just be more open, just share the information freely to whoever asks for it, especially young ladies. Like I understand the whole paranoia thing about teenage sexuality and all that stuff, but if you basically send someone out into the wilderness and don't tell them there are wolves out there, they're gonna get eaten or chased at least. Come on.
Well, I mean, when I was, how old was I? 15, and I was learning how to drive. There were books. I had to learn. I had to practice. I had to take a test. So really, there's so much to say about it. One, like, okay, point number one, when you tell young people about sex, they're less likely to have it when you fully educate them. And studies have shown that. So it turns that conventional wisdom on its head. And number two, there are real legitimate risks, for engaging in anything, but there's legitimate kind of consequences and things that can happen when you have sex with another human. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's important for people to know what's going on. So I'm totally with you on the education front. Well, Melissa, so one last question for you. So if anyone is listening to this episode and perhaps they are on hormonal contraceptives and they're, trying to decide what they're going to do, what is one thing that you would want to say to her?
I guess definitely research the side effects. Like look down deep. If you can go to a pharmacy and have someone show you the pamphlet, a nice lady at the pharmacy, let me do that. Like that would be great. Like just read up as much as you can on the different things out there. Check out like everything. Check all your bases, because the worst thing to do is to go in there walking blind. Because the one thing I really wish out of this whole experience was that, someone had, that I was able to find the information there and make, like you said, an informed decision because at least that way I would have known that, hey, I can keep an eye out for maybe anxiety showing up, or maybe I can keep an eye out for like weird skin issues that I've developed over the years. And that way you'd be able to know, okay, maybe I should either switch to something else or stop it entirely. That's entirely up to you. But I definitely inform yourself before even trying to start the stuff.
Well, I couldn't think of a better way to end. Thank you so much for being here, Melissa. It was a treat having you on the show.
And it was great coming on here. It's like talking to an old friend.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/209. I hope that you enjoyed my episode with Melissa. I just want to say a special thank you to Melissa for coming on the show and for being so open and candid with your story using hormonal birth control. I love these episodes because they really shed light on the real woman experience. So to really allow women in their own voice to share how how taking hormonal contraceptives affected them and to really share their own experience. And so every woman's experience is very, very different. Even when Melissa was talking about the difference between her experience and her sister's experience. And I think that's really important to highlight. So it's not, these episodes are not to say that every woman's going to have the same experience. It's more to actually allow women to share their own experiences so that we can all learn from them. And, I feel like throughout my life, I've always had the opportunity to learn from others. I've learned a lot from my friends, just being around multiples of different women through different experiences, different life experiences, different relationship experiences, different birth experiences, and of course, different hormonal birth control experiences. And I know personally, I learned a lot just by having different conversations with my friends as I was in my early 20s. So in my early 20s, I wasn't on hormonal birth control. And so I had a lot of different conversations with friends who were on hormonal birth control. And those conversations really shaped the way that I continue to look at hormonal birth control. I didn't have the depth of knowledge that I have now, but I saw a lot of my friends struggle with libido issues and a lot of friends not being able to necessarily have an orgasm when they were having sex, and a lot of friends who struggle with kind of emotional issues around hormonal birth control, whether that was anxiety or just mood swings or depression, things like that. And so I really paid attention to what the women in my life were telling me. And so hopefully by doing these types of episodes, I'm just creating a forum and a way for women to share their own experiences in their own words about how they have been affected by hormonal birth control. And so whether you are trying to decide whether or not to come off of hormonal birth control or when would be a good time, or whether you have already come off of hormonal birth control and you're just wanting to make sure that you feel really confident about using fertility awareness for birth control, it can be terrifying. You come off of birth control and you're totally convinced that you're going to get pregnant like that afternoon. And it's understandable. And we've all been there. And any woman who's been on hormonal birth control and has come off of it, we've all been there. And, fertility awareness is a method that you don't just read and learn that day. It's a method that you understand and learn first, and then you start using, but you don't necessarily get to that place where you feel comfortable and confident until you've gone through a couple of cycles and you start to really get a sense of what is happening with your cycles. And it's even harder when your cycles are a little bit off, especially when you're doing it by yourself. So if you're in any of those stages and you're wanting some additional support, make sure to join us in the July Fertility Awareness Mastery Group Program. So head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program for details and also to apply. And I want to thank you for hanging out with me today, for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I really appreciate all of you for tuning into the show. There are literally thousands upon thousands of podcasts you could be listening to, but you're listening to mine, and I really appreciate that. I also appreciate all of you for sharing the show with your friends, for rating and reviewing the podcast. There are 200 5-star reviews on the US iTunes. That's crazy. And I appreciate you so much for, really just spreading the word and for reviewing the show so that when someone is looking for a show to listen to, they can see what other people are saying about it. And so I really appreciate all of you for just being part of the Fertility Friday community. And if you haven't grabbed your copy of my free 3-part video series, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam101. So I wanted to create a video series, especially for those of you who are just coming into this. I get a lot of emails from you who fertility awareness was something that you just discovered a couple of months ago or weeks ago or days ago. And it can be a little overwhelming. So I wanted to give you a place to start. And even if you've been charting for a while, there's lots of helpful information in there. And I go into some details about cervical mucus and basal body temperature charting, all that kind of stuff. But make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam101 if you have not got that free video series, because you'll definitely want to check that out. And so thank you so much for spending some time with me today. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.